Hey everyone, and welcome to our monthly topical BIMscript webinar. Today we're going to be talking about Nurbs and versus Polygon Meshes and why they're important to BIMscript. So before we start, just a couple of housekeeping things. Today we're going to be missing Steve, who is normally my co-host. He's off traveling today, so I'll be flying solo. But if any of you have any questions, just feel free to ask your questions within the questions panel within the webinar control area, and I'll answer as many questions as I possibly can during this webinar. Also, the webinar is going to be recorded, so if you want to rewatch the webinar, or if you know that you have a colleague that wasn't able to make it or register, you can share the link. The webinar will be recorded and an email will be sent out in about 2 days with a link to the recording. So if you don't see anything within 2 days, feel free to contact us. Okay, so Nurbs versus Polygon Mesh. Okay, so we're going to talk about what those are in relationship to each other, and then why they're important to BIMscript. So what's the difference between the two? And then more importantly, why should you care? So Nurbs that stands for non-uniform rational B-splines. These kind of models produce accurate geometry. They produce the smoothest surface. And they're also mathematically defined, meaning that they use the concept of geometric continuity to stitch these NURB patches together so they can achieve this smooth curve. There's 3 types of continuity that they use to calculate the curve, and that's positional, tangential, and the curvature. NURB models, because of its accuracy and the way that it handles the surfaces, it's ideal for CAD-based applications. It also contributes to small file size. And Nurbs, because it's well adapted to CAD-based applications, it's also very agile, which means that you can transfer between CAD-based applications, animations to do like fly-throughs and things like that. Great for modeling and engineering programs. There are certain things that you need to remember though when you're talking about NURB modeling. Okay, when you get to when you start working on geometry that's too complex, you may get results that that will show a seam. So when it's trying to stitch these NURB patches together, and it reaches an area where it's kind of like difficult, it's very complex curve, it doesn't meet the edges very well, you're going to see a seam where they're fitted together. So even though it's done mathematically and they try to smooth out the surfaces as much as possible, you can sometimes get geometry where it doesn't play nice. So you're going to get the seam. Okay, when you're working with BIMscript, it's extremely important that you check over these models for these types of seams within your Nurbs model before you convert them into BIMscript, or before you convert them into a mesh in BIMscript. BIMscript generates an STL file that's used for 3D printing, and these types of files require that the model is watertight. So when if you're printing something in 3D, you don't want to have gaps or anything like that because it doesn't handle it very well. So if the Nurbs model isn't watertight before you convert it into a mesh, then you're going to get these gaps, and then you may encounter BIMscript not generating the STL file at all. So if you want to get rid of some of these seams, there are things that you can do to play with. You can set the tolerances in Rhino and things like that, so you can smooth this kind of this situation out. So there are things that you can do to mitigate the issue. So example files of Nurbs would be an STP, or it should be an STL, and an RFA. So RFA, STL, I think that's a typo. STL will be used in Oh no, sorry, that's correct. STP is a step file. So if you're coming out of any of the engineering programs, you can export out an STP file, which is a Nurbs file, and RFA, which is a native Revit file format. Okay, Polygon meshes. So Polygon Mesh was specifically designed to render 3D content on a computer. That's the original purpose of a Polygon Mesh. It is also really good to use for 3D printing. And the way that a Polygon Mesh is assembled is basically taking triangles or squares and they stitch them together to approximate a smooth edge. So it doesn't mathematically try to calculate what the curve is between points like a Nurb does. So a Polygon Mesh is control the detail and or the amount of detail on how smooth the surface is all controlled by the number of triangles and squares that you have that make up the surface. So the number of triangles though impacts the file size. So if we're looking at this picture here, you're going from 15,000 triangles on the right to show this car, to represent this car, all the way to 480,000 triangles or polygons, right? So you can tell by the picture that if you're looking at the front of the hood here, it's really, you know, if we're talking about an image, it's pixelated, but you can see all the faces, all the flat edges here on the front of the hood. Whereas once you start increasing the density and moving down this line, you're going to start seeing that everything starts gets smoother as you go along. The problem is that as you add more polygons, the geometry gets more dense, which impacts the file size. So you're going to have to find a balance between the two files and see what you can sacrifice with less geometry to represent what you're trying to show to the end user to save file size versus if something needs a lot of detail or even a mix and match. Like you can have parts that don't need as much detail as others, so you can control the file size and the look of your model by adjusting the density of polygons within each separate geometric component. So an example of files that use Polygon meshes would be SKP, which is a SketchUp file, and then OBJ, which is an object file. So those are the major differences between the two and a couple of applications that use each one. So for those of you who have used BIMscript, you may notice that we require both mesh and Nurbs geometry. And for those who haven't used it, now you know that it's going to require them. But why? Why do we need to have both? So let's find out. BIMscript is designed really to support a multitude of applications, from BIM applications to rendering, 3D printing, augmented and virtual reality. So you can see that there's a wide range of applications that the BIMscript content or the content that is generated out of BIMscript wants to be or can be consumed in, right? Each application has a different purpose. And with each different purpose, there's a different set of requirements. So the person who's doing 3D printing might not need this, might not have the same requirements as a person who's doing rendering applications or augmented reality, right? So for instance, a rendering application does not care if your model is watertight, but 3D printing does, okay? Augmented reality, you can use less polygons in your model and then make up the detail with texture mapping. You might not be able to do that with rendering applications. So each application has a different set of requirements, so they require different different modeling methods. Okay. And then BIMscript also tries to aim to support as many different users as possible. So just like different applications, we want to support as many different users. So even though BIMscript is generating BIM content, we're not just creating content to support just like the BIM aspect, right? We want to support the guys who are doing rendering. We want to support the people who are doing 3D printing and augmented reality. So they may not all work together, but they still may need the same type of content. So we want to be able to support all those users as well. So the more users we support, the more applications we support, the more files that we have to be able to generate. So different software means different purpose. They have different needs, which require different modeling methods. So how do we accomplish this in BIMscript? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you when you run Rhino and you launch BIMscript, what is the process? And it's not actually that hard. So I'm going to fire this up right now. So you can see I've cleaned up this trash can, okay? This trash can came out of an STP file or a step file, and I've gone in and I've cleaned up all the internal bits that make up this trash can. You don't, because in BIMscript, you don't need to see any of the internal components because it doesn't, we're not gonna be looking at all the little bits and pieces. We're not manufacturing it in this particular case. So we don't need all like the screws and all that kind of stuff because it weighs the model down. So after you clean it all up and you have the components that you need, we're left with this. It's basically an outer shell. Okay, so this right now you can see this is a NURB. It's not a mesh, this is a NURB model. And the NURB model is there so that we can facilitate files like Revit, right? Because Revit consumes NURBs. But what about all the other applications? Well, the other applications require a mesh model, which is why you need both, right? So you need to have both in the single Rhino file, and then BIMscript will automatically know which geometry to use when it's creating all of the different file formats, right? So you don't have to worry about that. You just have to create a mesh twin of that. So what we do first is we clean up the source file or the step file. So now we just have closed solid poly surfaces, which is a mesh, or sorry, which is a NURB. And we just move them all into a NURBS layer for BIMscript. The next thing that you do now is you have a choice. You can select all the geometry and then turn it into a mesh, or you can select each individual geometry and convert each part in, or make a mesh copy of each part individually so that you can control the density of that mesh. For the sake of this example, I'm just going to select them all. Now, Rhino itself has a built-in tool called Mesh, which will actually convert a NURB model. It will make a mesh duplicate out of it, which is great because it means that as a content developer, you don't have to go and recreate this mesh model from scratch. You can actually leverage what you have from the manufacturer, or if you work for the manufacturer, you can leverage your own files to make the mesh. So if we use the mesh command here, we'll just type in mesh, and you get a pop-up. So this is the basic setup, or a simple setup, right? You get a slider, takes you from fewer polygons to more polygons, and what we're going to do is, I'm just going to close out of this window, expand the perspective here. And we're just going to check out the wireframe, and what we're going to do is we'll type in mesh again. And if I go from fewer polygons, I can do a preview, and you can see that it generates this mesh. So all the black is the mesh. Okay, so not really dense. If we slide it all the way to the bottom and we do another preview, you see that not much has changed because it's trying to keep the shape. But if we go on to the end of the spectrum to more polygons and we hit the preview, you can see now that the mesh is a lot denser. It's going to be a lot smoother, but that also means that the file is going to be a lot heavier. So in this case, we're just going to shoot for somewhere in the middle, and we're going to click OK. And it does, and Rhino does this thing, and I'm just going to hide the selected Nurbs geometry for now. And here is the mesh. Okay, so there's your mesh geometry, which looks pretty good. So that's the tool that comes out of Rhino out of the box. Now, BIMscript also has its own tool. So what I'm going to do here, and I'm just going to delete this. Oh, sorry, before I say that, before I delete it, if you were to do it this way and use BIMscript, you would have to create a mesh, and then we're going to unhide the Nurbs. And I'm going to select the base here. And you can see that there's a mesh base and a poly surface base. So I have the Nurbs and I have a mesh. So I would need to select both for BIMscript. Oops. Right there, I got selected both. I have one poly surface and one mesh. And then I would have to go into BIMscript and link the geometry. When you link the geometry in BIMscript, what it does is when it starts generating the file, you're really just importing or you're inserting the mesh geometry into the script. And then based on that mesh geometry, it'll create the NURB file for whichever file format it needs. It'll know which geometry to use based on what that mesh is linked to. So when it creates a NURB version of it, it just takes the NURB copy and then puts it into the script. So if you don't link it, then when you generate the NURB file, like for instance, if you generate the Revit file, then that piece will not show up because it's not linked. Okay, so you would have to go into each individual piece or each individual pair, select them both, and then link the geometry. So link the mesh to the NURB. Now, the easier way to do it, we're just going to undo this right now. So we're back to just having a Nurbs. So we can select the whole thing again. And if we're using the tool out of BIMscript, we can go under the link and unlink Nurbs geometry. And on the very bottom, there is a mesh and link geometry. So what this does is it actually puts it combines the two steps and puts it into one. So we're saving you a couple of extra steps. You don't have to ensure that you select each pair. You might miss something or you might select the wrong thing. So we're taking all the guesswork or all the manual work out of that and automating it all within this command here. So if I select the mesh and link geometry button, I get the detailed options. So BIMscript defaults to the detailed option, but if I wanted to see the simple control again with just the slider, be from low polygon to high polygon, I can just go back down here on the bottom right, select the simple control, and I'm back to the slider option again. Okay, so if you want more control over how your mesh is created, you can go back to detailed, and then you can adjust any of these settings for your detailed component. So I'm going to go back to simple, and I'm going to again keep it around the middle, and I'm going to select OK, and it's going to generate the same exact mesh as I had before, but now BIMscript has also gone ahead and linked all the geometry. So this base here is going to be linked to this poly surface. And the way I can check that is if I go under the link and unlink geometry and I can go select, I have all of these different pairs that I can select now. So each one of these is actually a pair of objects. So it's the mesh and the mesh and the NURB twin that are linked together. So it does all that work for you, which is great. So there's two ways to do it. If you're just using Rhino without BIMscript, then you have the mesh command. But if you're using BIMscript and you want to create your mesh geometry from your source NURB geometry, then we highly encourage you to use the built-in tool for BIMscript because it saves you a lot of steps. Okay. So just seeing if you guys have any questions regarding this presentation. We don't have a lot of, there's a kind of a mix up on the invite, so it's a pretty small crowd today, but if any of you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, you can contact us through BIMscript at BIMobject.com. If you guys have any questions, if you don't see anything, or if nothing pops out right now that you want to ask, and you think about it later, you can contact any of the global trainers for BIMscript at BIMobject.com. You can also find copies or links to any tips and tricks for BIMscript, as well as any blogs that come out on our LinkedIn page. Okay, and if you want to find out any general information about BIMscript, you can go to bimscript.bimobject.com. On that site, you're going to see a form that you can fill in, and you can request more information, or you can even request to be signed in for our e-learning course, which will get you your BIMscript accreditation to start creating BIMscript content. So every first or second week of the month, we host a BIMscript accreditation webinar just to go over, a high-level overview of what BIMscript is and what the process is to be accredited. Then our next session is going to be on the 14th of August. And we will have our next topical webinar, which I believe is on the 28th, or yeah, I believe it's the 28th of August, to talk about ranged versus discrete parameters within BIMscript and how to control those and what those do in terms of properties. Just trying to see if we have any questions. So, we have a question that says, from a flowchart perspective, learning upon learning, is it a prerequisite to have Rhino training prior to embarking on BIMscript? So, no, not particularly. So, Rhino itself is a modeling is a 3D modeling program. Now, if you have any background in Revit or any ArchiCAD, any kind of 3D modeling application, 3D Studio Max, Mudbox, that sort of stuff, then all of those skills are transferable. Really the only thing that you need to do is find out where all the buttons are that you were used to in the old application. Just got to find out where the new commands are in Rhino. But modeling itself and learning the commands is not very difficult at all. Learning BIMscript is just as easy. BIMscript is it uses a subset of C programming, and it's very logical. So it's very orderly in terms of the commands, and there's a lot of tools within BIMscript that will help you automate the scripting process. So you can just it will do an autocomplete for you once you start typing in a command. Let's see. So yeah, so Revit actually, all their buttons, they're pretty intuitive. There's key commands, so they have tool tips and everything like that. So if you know what you want to do, chances are if you just type in what you want to do in the command line, there's going to be a command for it. The other thing is that if you do start having trouble and you can't find the command or find the button that you're looking for, the Rhino community, the Rhino forum is great. They have a lot of information out there. Highly encourage you guys to go and check that out if you encounter a stumbling block in terms of Rhino. But yeah, I mean, it's not difficult. It's not a very high, it doesn't require a high learning curve to learn how to do this. particularly because you can leverage existing models. You don't always have to redo everything from scratch. So, you know, it's not too overwhelming. So it looks like we're pretty much it for questions. Again, if you guys find anything that you want to ask, you want to talk about, let us know, and feel free to contact us. I see that we have Zoe who's trying to raise her hand, and I think that was just because of the questions that she was asking before. So again, the webinar is pre-recorded or is recorded. So if you want to go and watch it again, the link will be sent out in 2 days. If you want to share the link with anybody, please, we encourage you to do so. And if you have any suggestions on any future topic that you want us to talk about, please let us know at BIMscript@BIMobject.com. And we're always looking for more topics that interest you guys. You know, we want to know what's important to you, and we want to talk about that. So until next time, I want to thank everybody for joining, and hope to see you guys on the accreditation webinar in a couple weeks. All right, thanks. Oh, sorry, one more question. Is there some sort of supervised volunteer program where accredited content developers can actually work on real life BIM object development? Well, yes. I mean, if you go through the BIMscript accreditation training and you get accredited, you get your own private sandbox on BIMobject that will allow you to keep creating content. And the BIMscript trainers are always available to assist. So if you want to start creating content, you go through the training, you get accredited, everything is good. You want to start working on new stuff. You have some ideas you want to play around with. You want to start creating content, see how that works. Once you get accredited, you'll have your own sandbox for you to create your product pages. You can upload all your files up there. You can start hosting, or you can start storing the BIMscript files that you generate, so that you can practice and learn. And trainers will always be readily accessible, so that you can, if you're stuck on something, you can send myself or my partner Peter. You can send us your Rhino file or screenshots or whatever, and we'll be more than happy to take a look at the file for you. We'll even send you videos back on how to fix the problem, or if there's a bug or something like that, we'll let you guys know. But yeah, there's going to be support for you all the time if you choose to do, or if you choose to keep going using BIMscript and seeing what kind of potential it has, and we encourage you to do that. So it's not necessarily supervised, but it's you know, you do have the assistance there. So if you ever have a question, just send us a message and we'll help you out. So if that's it, it looks like we don't have any more questions aside from that. I want to thank everybody once again for tuning in, and see you next week. Thanks.